Hello, welcome to episode 31 of Creative Dynamos. Tonight I have with me Andrew K. Clark. You and I have known each other through threads
Yes.
for several months now.
Mhm.
Andrew is an author and a raconteur and social media magnate. Before we get
Maniac. I
started,
think you mean, I think the word is maniac. I'm not sure you mean magnet. Maniac.
Andrew, before we get started, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the work you do. Having authors on, I've got to listen to quite a few of the shows, so it's an honor to be here.
We'll see if that honor remains when we're done.
Totally fair.
After
Totally fair.
For my listeners and watchers that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been a writer, and what has drawn you to throwing your words out there for the world to see?
Yeah, so I probably started writing in high school, like a lot of us did. Realized I had kind of an interest in creative writing. And the story I always tell around that is I had a friend who gave me the complete Langston Hughes poetry collection. So for me, prior to reading Langston Hughes, I thought, poetry is Shakespeare. It's iambic pentameter. It's high language. That's what I associate with poetry. So the epiphany for me was that, oh, I can write in my own vernacular, my own voice. And so I started with poetry and then, moved on to short stories. I spent a lot of years writing, raising kids and building a career and all that kind of stuff. So there were a lot of years I was writing and not seeking publishing, if that makes sense. So got earnest about trying to publish maybe 2017, something like that. Started really submitting a lot of work, and it kind of built from there. But I've been a writer, pretty much since high school, and then a shorter window for actively trying to do something with it. If that makes sense.
It does, absolutely. So you much like myself are in Western North Carolina,
Mhm.
and although neither of us particularly sound like it,
Give
uh,
me a beer, and then you'll see.
oh yes, 100%. Like I get two whiskeys in, and I get real Southern.
That's it.
Um,
That's it.
you're a large part of what you write and your identity gets back to the Appalachian roots that you have.
Mhm.
What role does that play in your writing, and why is that part of yourself important to you?
So I think the way I would answer it is with a joke. And the joke is you can't ask an Appalachian man a question without getting a story. And there's a lot of truth to that. My grandfather, you could ask him, where's the nearest gas station? And he would tell you where the nearest gas station was by way of a story in which he talked about that land and who used to own that land. And that time that boy got killed down there on the river near the gas station. And like he couldn't just answer the question. And you're just like, I just want to know where the gas is. That's all I care about. So I think I get it honest. My people, I come from 11th generation Southern Appalachian. So they came from Scotland in 1739, landed in New Bern, North Carolina, and made their way over to the mountains. And so there is that oral storytelling tradition I come from. So I witnessed that with my grandfather, great uncles, all those kind of things. And I think too, a lot of Appalachian writers, that choose to write about this place, it figures into their work as almost a character in and of itself. And so I think that's true of my work. And I I don't really like sort of like gatekeeping notions. The idea that if you're not from Appalachia, you can't write about Appalachia. But what I will say is when someone writes about Appalachia and they haven't done their homework and what they write is caricature and stereotype, and that's, pretty much what Hollywood has always done with Appalachia, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of excruciating. So to me, I do like to seek authentic Appalachian voices when I'm reading that work. And of course, I try to read as widely as I can by authors all over the world, different races, different cultures, different backgrounds. And, but I do think that I understand the voice of the people here. And so it is a natural thing for me to write about the people and hopefully do it with honesty. So it's sort of like the ability to kind of look at our scars and wounds and mistakes, but then also, capture the people with some empathy if possible. is kind of what I think the burden is. That being said, I think, my books, well, a couple of bookstores asked me, like, do you want to be in the sort of local interest section, or do you think your books belong in the horror section? And I would say that they belong in the horror section. So,
100%.
in terms of what kind of work I write, and yeah, so they said in Appalachia is very important. I think that with my fantastical elements and horror elements, there is like a gritty realism that I'm trying to strive for with the landscape and the people and that kind of thing. But on the shelf, I think most people would probably put me in the horror section as opposed to that sort of pure, authentic, historical Appalachian literature, if you will.
It's, I think you make so many good points in that. And it really is. And this is not just true of Appalachia. And I want our listeners to take careful note of how we're saying this word.
Yeah.
Because if you pronounce it Appalachia, I'll throw in Appalachia.
Or Appalachia. You get that one a lot.
Yeah, and that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really important if we're writing about places that we're not intimately familiar with, then it pays to do your research and make sure that you're not painting people with a broad brush, or that you're not engaging in cultural stereotypes.
Yeah, I think we have that burden when we write. So for me, the voice of the Appalachian people comes pretty naturally. If you look at my first novel, Where Dark Things Grow, I like to say that's in the voice of my grandparents, great uncles, that generation. And unfortunately, what you see is that generation to my father's generation, you see a little bit of diminishing of that beautiful Appalachian accent. And then with me a little more, with my kids, it's even worse because they've grown up on, YouTube and all these other things that impact their I'm trying to get my camera not to blur, but that sort of impact their accent. So it sort of changes with the generations. And so I think like one thing that I found attractive about writing that first book was trying to capture that accent and that voice. There's a certain voice, the arrangement of words, the colloquialisms, all those kind of things that to me are beautiful, and try to capture them. And I think you're right. If we try to write outside of our own experience, then we have an obligation as writers to make sure that we do it with empathy, and also that we do our homework. So I have characters of color in my work, women in my work that are in the second book, that's the main character is female. So one of the ways that I addressed that was having, beta readers, sensitivity readers, things like that, just so that I get the feedback on and make sure that I capture the character in a way that doesn't ever stumble toward stereotype or caricature, if you will.
100%. And I think that you raise another good point, using sensitivity readers, using other readers as part of your editing process to try and make sure that you're nailing those things.
It's really important. It's really important. And again, I think people may have good intentions sometimes, but if you don't do that extra work, there is always the risk that you'll get something wrong. And so I know that my beta readers and critique partners and things have been absolutely instrumental to me capturing, for example, a teenage girl's voice in the 1980s in the second novel. And so I'm very proud of the fact that reviews will say that I did that well, but it wasn't just me. It wasn't by accident. It was doing the work and then relying on, great critique partners and beta readers to help me.
So you've already mentioned one of your book's titles. So right now you've got Where Dark Things Grow and Where Dark Things Rise. And for your benefit, let me tilt down here.
Oh, I love it. I love it. You're the man. You're the man.
We're in the shirt. Before we get into talking about those books specifically, so
Yep.
you write horror.
Yes.
And for me as a horror author, I'm multi-genre, but horror is my first love.
Mhm.
I have a lot of touchstones, a lot of authors that I grew up reading. Who are some of your authors that have influenced your work and have basically become a touchstone for you in your own writing?
Yeah. So I like to say I'm an amalgamation of lots of different things, but I would say as far as horror, started for me with a lot of people, our generation, Stephen King, right? So reading a lot of
Mm.
Stephen King, I started reading him in high school, read him in college, read him beyond college. And also Anne Rice was another horror writer that I loved her stories. And so if I think about kind of my reading journey, I would include those, but then I would also include like great Southern writers like William Gay and Dennis Johnson and Ron Rash and some of those folks. So, and then later on, I became a big fan of, what they call the magical realism genre. So that's Haruki Murakami, it's Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And so what I hope I'm doing with my work is kind of like bringing all of those different things together so that you have hopefully the gritty realism of, Ron Rash with some of the fantastical and horrific elements of, Haruki Murakami or Stephen King or something like that. So those are some of the big names that have influenced me, but I try to read as widely as I can. I think one of our greatest living writers is Jesmyn Ward. And so she would be somebody in my mind that crosses over in that magical realism realm. Probably nobody would characterize her as horror, but certainly terrible things happen to her characters in her books. And we have ghosts and we have spirits and entities that are moving through her works. That'd be another a writer that I just absolutely admire. Love what she does.
You've definitely given me an author to check out. I don't think I'm familiar with her work.
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, to me, like I think she's one of our, and I'm not alone on this, like one of our greatest living writers. So what I would say is her work might hearken to your ear a little bit. Toni Morrison, some of
Mhm.
those things. Ta-Nehisi Coates' Water Dancer, very much in the same vibe as Jesmyn Ward, but yeah, she's one of my favorite writers.
So before we dig into your writing, tell us a little bit about these two books. Give us
Yeah,
like your elevator
sure.
pitch.
Sure. So Where Dark Things Grow is the first book in the duology, and it is set in the 1930s, Great Depression, Southern Appalachia. So we have a family that's really struggling, gritty, hard scrabble existence. Young 15-year-old boys growing up, dad goes missing. Mom is struggling with what we would today call mental health issues. And against that backdrop, this sort of really powerless character that's trying to struggle and feed his brothers and sisters and his mom, he encounters a magical wolver. So this would be the appealing to the Scots fantasy side, right? So this is a powerful creature that he believes he can control, seems to be able to control. And he starts off with very benevolent goals. And I'm going to use this for good. And then he starts to think, oh, some of these people in the community weren't very nice to us. Maybe they should get some comeuppance. So he goes down a little bit of a dark path. At the same time, there's some women who are being kidnapped in the community. And a friend of our protagonist, Leo, a friend of his is kidnapped. And so he decides to use the wolver to try to rescue her, and things go down a dark path from there. The second book in the series is called Where Dark Things Rise, and it's set in the 1980s. So we move forward 2 generations. So a few characters from the first book are grandparents or grandparent age in the second book. And now there's a new set of teenagers that have to reckon with the return of this ancient evil that had appeared in the first book. And in that book, we have a protagonist, Mina, who's 16 years old, growing up in a trailer park in Appalachia and desperately just wanting to escape, right? Her whole plan is, I'm going to take this 4.0 GPA that I have and get the heck out of here. But then she gets pulled into some magical powers of her own, and also some of her friends are threatened by this evil force that's returned. So she gets pulled into playing a role in saving them. And so the question is like, is she going to be able to escape to the leafy college campus that she wants, or is something darker going to happen? So you have to read to find out.
I have read Where Dark Things Grow.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I loved about it, and it was like the sense of place. I think you really nailed that. I grew up in the eastern part of North Carolina and moved to Western Carolina as an adult. And I have been working on a story. It's probably my first story that explicitly takes place in Eastern North Carolina, much like
Nice.
Mush Grow. It
Hmm.
takes place in the Depression era, and
Nice.
I'm really trying to nail that sense of place. What's your approach to that in getting that sense of place in your work?
Yeah, I think it's going to sound like a little cliche, but I think to really get the sense of place, we are drawing on all of the senses. So it's not just about what we see, but also beyond the senses, like what we feel in a place. And so a lot of times, and particularly in Where Dark Things Rise, I have characters that have contradictory feelings about these mountains that live in, right? So some of them feel like these mountains are like big sentries around us, protecting us. And some feel like they're choking us. I'm trapped. And so I think a lot of the capturing of places, that sensory detail where you let me know what it feels like to be there, what I smell, what I see, what I taste, what I touch, all those kind of things, but also the emotional reaction to the place. And so in Grow, for example, the characters spend a lot of times in the woods. And so if I just talked about they walked through and saw some more trees, like, it could get kind of rote after a while. So to me, it's about the emotions of the characters shifting with that landscape as we move through the story. And it becomes almost part of their character arc, if you will. So those are the things I think about when I am drawn to a story that captures place really, really well. The sort of physical immersion, let me understand what I see and hear and all those things, but also that emotional reaction to the place. And again, you can have two characters in the same place and have the opposite reaction to the world around them. For one, the landscape can be, a foil, right? And the other can be like, well, this is where I'm safe. And so to me, that sort of playing with those emotions is really where place, I think, hits a higher register than just like pretty descriptions of what the landscape looks like and the color of the mountains. Right.
Yeah.
That's not enough, I don't think.
Yeah, I grew up early, like elementary school in the Ozarks,
Mm,
and my dad was stationed in Arkansas for a
mm,
while. And I love the mountains that, whether it's the Ozarks or the Appalachians, they
yeah.
have very different kind of
Hmm.
feels to them. But the thing that I loved about your story was, you know, just how much sensory input you gave us.
Yeah.
And so,
Thank you.
yeah, that is a real skill and a real thing to pay attention to. I think, especially in horror to a degree, because you you're describing you're eventually you're going to bring in something that in a lot of cases, especially with your stories, where you're going to have something that's not real. And so I think grounding your story in that sensory reality provides a good foil. Maybe that's not the right word, but a good counterbalance to
Foundation,
the
maybe.
fantastic things. Yeah.
I think I think you're right, and the way that I look at it is the way that you can kind of articulate whether a movie works for you or a Netflix series work for you. Books are the same, and what I mean by that is sometimes when I watch horror movies, the characters seem to be fodder for like death, like they're just just going through the meat grinder or whatever. Like there's no, I don't care about these characters. It's like the only thing that is the film is giving me is maybe unique ways for people to die that I haven't thought of before. Okay, so to me, that's the difference between great special effects versus story. So with story, I think you're hitting on something really important. If the characters are grounded in a real world place and have emotions and concerns and worries that we can relate to, then we care if these fantastical forces start acting against them, right? And so I want a story where the characters matter, where I want the reader to fall in love with this character, and then maybe I do something terrible to them, but at the point where that happens, that they care. And to me, that's the difference again between story and again just a whole collage of scenes, right? We can write beautiful or great descriptive horror scenes, but if I don't care about what happens to that character, I'm not sure that the emotional register is there for it. And you mentioned the
Yes.
Ozarks. I have to say, Daniel Woodrell is one of my favorite writers. We lost him recently, but I've taught some classes on writing, and I always tell people, particularly if they're writing Southern fiction, that if you want to see like the best opening chapter that I've ever read is Daniel Woodrell's Winter's Bone. It's the best to me. It's the most compact, perfect chapter that it's like one of the best I've ever read, in the sense that you get a real sense of who these characters are, how the landscape is a foil and affecting them in a very compact first chapter. It's just, to me, it's brilliant.
I want to dive into your characters, but before we do, I have a question that
Sure.
just it eclipses everything else that we're going to talk about. How do you take your grits?
Okay. So the first thing you have to do is when you make the grits, you've got to replace about half the water with heavy cream.
Yes.
Okay. So you follow the instructions on the bag. Grits are not hard to make, and these are going to be slow cooked stone ground grits. That's the first thing you have. You don't have that, just forget about it, right? Because
there's no point.
garbage in, garbage out. So you want slow cooked stone ground grits. Replace at least a third of the water with heavy cream, up to a half, depending on like how thick you want your grits to be, maybe how thick you want to be. And then I think a perfect way to serve them is just salt, pepper, and butter. And that's really all you need. If you want to get crazy, add some cheese, serve them with your shrimp, whatever you want to do. Hey, it's perfect. The only thing you can't do is serve them with anything sweet. So there's no honey on grits. There's no sugar on grits. They're not grits anymore, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, salt, pepper, butter. It's got to be real butter. Don't put anything else. You just throw the grits away if you're not going to use real butter. So that's how I take it. Only way.
Although I've spent the majority of my life in the South, it took me marrying a Southern woman from the eastern part of the state who was raised by her grandmother to discover grits. And the readers our listeners are like, why are they talking about grits? Why are we talking
really
about grits,
important.
Andrew?
We're talking about grits because I am known as Grits Daddy online, and it's a long story, but in essence, I posted something about how sugar doesn't belong in grits, and it sort of became this viral post, and everybody sort of associated me with it. And so that's why we're talking about it. But, the thing is, if you're a Southerner, like the way you have to think about grits is they go with every dish in the South, right? Dinner, lunch, it doesn't matter. And it's kind of like, rice with Korean food or Asian food, right? It is that much of a staple, or can be, if you choose to elevate your menu.
Yes, 100% concur. There is this place. Sadly, they're no longer open, but there was this place in here downtown, and their grits were magical.
Yeah,
just
you want them thick. You want them thick. If you're making them and they get runny, like that's no good. So you just want to like back off and add some more grits or something till you get them thicker. They need to be like, turn the pot up and it's slow to come out. That's the right consistency.
So now that we've solved the grits problem,
very important.
Your characters in Grow represent people from a variety of backgrounds. I love Lilyfax. I love Leo. They're your poor Appalachian kind of folk. And then you've got other characters who are from the city, and you've got all this variety of characters. How much of you is represented in these characters, and how much of it comes from other people that you know?
With the writer, there's always like a little kernel of yourself in characters. And so maybe they have something that, you kind of blow out of proportion, or maybe it's something that you wish you had. But there are little kernels of things. So, for example, Leo in Where Dark Things Grow, one of the things he does to try to feed the family is go out and chop wood for a local widow, right? And so he, travels to her place, chops wood, carries it in for her, stuff like that, because she can't carry the wood. So when I was growing up, I mowed yards for money in the summertime, and in the winter we went and my cousins and I would go split wood. So I did split wood for a widow. So that's something from my own personal background. The other thing that is interesting about that is in my community, she was known as the widow because she was sort of the matriarch in the area. And so because she was the matriarch, there could be other widows, clearly, like Widow Jones, Widow Smith, whatever, but she was the OG, if you will. So she was just known as the widow. And I say that because I've had readers say things like, well, you didn't give her a name, so she doesn't have agency. It's like, no, you don't understand. This is like a title, like she's the queen. You understand? Everybody goes to her to figure out how to heal their kids when they're sick with the cold or the flu or whatever. And so that's sort of a status thing for her. So yeah, there are things from my life that kind of work in. I would say with Where Dark Things Grow, there's a lot of some of the hardscrabble existence the characters have is based on my grandparents who were teenagers in the Great Depression in the Asheville area, more rural than in the city. And so some of the stories that they told me growing up, like made their way into the book. So there's some of me with the characters, and then some characters, like I said, it may be something that I aspire to and I'm not, but I think you're hitting on something interesting. There is always like an element of a truth or something real within even, like I said, a fantastical novel. And so, for example, in Where Dark Things Rise, which is set in the 80s, I was an 80s kid. So some of the things that teenagers do, we did some of those things. I'm not saying which ones because that's private information, but an example that I use there is Gabe's dad sort of embarrasses him because he goes to the pool with socks, right? Because he's trying to keep his feet from getting burnt or something. Well, my dad did that. Like I was the teenager that was mortified by the dad with the black socks on the beach. So again, some of the little details that come in, and I would say that other than that, Gabe's dad has no relation to my father at all. But these little things kind of come in that we bring in from our own experience and other things that we're exposed to. And I think that's what kind of makes it rich. So there are people who know me that read some of these things and they make some connections there. I remember you used to go chop wood for the widow. Yeah, I did. And I would get on my bicycle and ride about 4 miles down the road and mow her yard in the summertime. And then the winter I would go and chop wood for her.
My favorite character in Grow is hands down Lilyfax. In fact, I think I remember threatening you while I was reading it, threatening you on threads with, you better make sure nothing happens to Lilyfax.
Lilyfax, yeah, she's my favorite character in that book as well. And I would say people have asked like, well, where did she come from? That kind of thing. So there's a little bit of my grandmother in her. My grandmother was sort of like a little bit spicy. She didn't take anything from anybody, right? And so she'd let you know how she felt. And I would also say, I've had a few people say that they really liked Lilyfax in the first book and then Mina in the second book. And the comments like, you write women really well. It's like, well, I grew up in a household with 4 sisters. So if you pay attention, you learn some things. And so I would say like Lilyfax is like some of the things I saw with my sisters. A little bit of my wife is in there, Casey, with Lilyfax. And so, yeah, I think that, kind of drawing on that experience of growing up with 4 sisters. And I was the oldest. They were all younger sisters, and some close to me in age and some, quite a bit younger. But if you pay attention, I think you can write outside your own experience. And then also, like I said, even though I grew up with 4 sisters and, have known women and have daughters and all that kind of fun stuff, even then you really need the beta readers and you need the critique partners to, challenge you on points and make sure you get things right. In the first book, Where Dark Things Grow, there is an African-American character in that book. And she doesn't have a lot of real estate on the page, but she has a couple of chapters from her own point of view, and she figures into like the big climax. And I'll never forget sending some of these pages to a friend of mine, a wonderful poet named River Madison, who lives in Beaufort, South Carolina, and her writing back and giving me notes on like how to improve her character. And in early drafts, this Black girl was coming in and out of the pages and I had named her, right? She just, like she didn't have as much real estate. She grew in importance. And part of the reason she grew in importance is talking to River. And she was saying, give her a name. They have taken our name. And so that was like this gut wrenching moment. And I was like, Thank you. I mean, it was so pivotal and important to have her read those early drafts and give me notes. And so I hope that I captured that character with empathy and gave her some depth. And one way I did that is, again, giving her chapters from her own point of view, because one thing in that first book is there are a number of characters who are impacted by this trafficking scheme that's going on. And one thing that I hate about, a lot of people like true crime and horror stories and things like that. But one thing I hate is when the victims don't have a voice, right? So everybody goes into the crime scene. There's like a chalk outline on the floor, and we don't get to know who this person is. We see a picture of them, as a cheerleader or something, and that's supposed to tell us who they are. And so one decision I made is that I wanted those characters to have a voice, and that was through these evolutions of rewrites and so forth. And so we hear from 3 different characters who are impacted by the actions of this trafficking ring. And to me, that was really important to try to capture what they're feeling, who they are as people, and humanize them in a way so they don't become, again, the chalk outline. To me, that's a pet peeve I have with a lot of stories, right?
And it's important to, and this is a drum that I kind of bang pretty often on here too. It's important to pay attention to the kind of, when you approach somebody for feedback, for specific feedback like that, it's good to pay attention to them.
Yeah.
I sent some of my older stories to a friend of mine, and I was like, I need you to tell me how I write women and how I treat women in these stories. And I want you to give me the unvarnished truth. And that's one of the reasons why I picked her, was because I knew she'd be not brutally honest, but also she wouldn't pull any punches.
Important. Yeah. The way I see it is, over time as a writer, you develop discernment. And so what I mean by discernment is the ability to understand what's really important to pay attention to, and then maybe where you need to stick to your guns, if you will. And that can be a challenge. So when you have a group of beta readers, one thing you can understand is that if they're all pointing to a problem, you got a problem. Now, maybe their ideas of the prescription that they've given you for fixing the problem is not the right answer. But if chapter 3 is stumping everybody, there's a problem with chapter 3. Like, you can just count on it, right? And so I think, again, you want to have discernment. You want to have things that you stick to your guns about, but you don't want to be precious about your work. You need to be coachable, if you will, by your beta readers, and coachable, if you will, with your editor when you get to that stage. The worst thing I think you can be is like someone who can't work with an editor. You're kind of worthless, and you've lost the plot, lost the thread, right? Your confidence in your own abilities has exceeded reality at that point, if you can't listen to editors and you can't listen to feedback. So to me, it's a precious gift. And I beta read for other folks. I'm in critique group with some folks. And so I try to return that favor. Now, the way that I think our obligation goes, if we're the person giving the feedback, the obligation there is with an eye on making the best story that the other writer can make. And so that means if I don't have time to really pay attention to it, I should not accept the gig. They ask me, can you beta read for me? If I don't have time, I should say no, because if I'm going to half-ass it, I'm not doing them any good whatsoever. And then I think too, in the way that we give feedback, it's very important. I think you were trying to hit on that with the idea of, not necessarily brutal honesty, but helpful feedback. There's a difference between critique, just in absence of an eye on improvement. That's kind of worthless. Like, Scott sends me a poem. I look at the poem's like, yeah, I don't really like this poem, Scott. And if I stop there, what have I done? I have done nothing for you.
Nothing.
Nothing. Mm-hmm. And that was worthless feedback. And that's the thing I would tell new writers is, you want those critique partners that not only can talk to you about what's not working, but give you ideas around how to improve it. Now, you don't have to take all those ideas. And you certainly can. If you've got 6 different beta readers that are all giving you, peppering you with different things, if you took all of their feedback, you might end up with a Hallmark movie, which would be worthless. So again, you have to develop discernment and figure out those things that are really important to stick to your guns about. And I know that I had beta readers in the second book, Where Dark Things Rise. I have a group of teenagers in the 80s, and some of the choices they make are not great, right? So I had a few of the beta readers kind of poking at that a little bit, like, I really don't like that she got in that guy's car, right? And so I would say, okay, well, let me ask you this. When you were a teenager, did you ever see someone get in a car and think she shouldn't be getting in that car? And they were like, yep. I said, that's what I'm trying to do here. That's what I'm trying to do. So again, it's, really taking the feedback, analyzing all of it, and then having discernment to say where you need to, again, stick to your guns. An example, working with editors, as we talked about Appalachian literature earlier, I had an editor not from the region. And so she would kind of poke at some of the dialogue, stuff like that. And even some of the internal thoughts I was writing in kind of like I was having internal thoughts sort of in Appalachian speak. And so that was another place where I was, very much going to stick to my guns about. Like, I know how these people think. They're not going to think like a Cornell professor. They're not going to think in those kind of sentences, perfect grammar, perfect everything. So again, over time, you gain confidence as a writer, but to not be able to take feedback or to not be coachable is probably like the death knell for the writer, because once you get to the point where you don't think you can improve, I promise you're going to fall on your ass. I promise you.
Yes.
And so it's kind of like with anything in life. If you don't think you can improve as a friend or a partner in a relationship, like, you're going to screw up. So to me, being able to take feedback, obviously having discernment about the things that are important to stick to my guns about, but being coachable, being editable. So when my editor comes in there to edit, then I'm absolutely open to every suggestion to make the work better. Very important.
I want to touch on something you said that I think is important too for writers, new writers, to know your characters are not going to use perfect grammar.
Right.
They're going to drop their G's, or they're going to, use slang, or they're going to do the wrong verb tense or something. And I think that when we're editing and when we're receiving edits from others, making sure that we're keeping that character's voice intact and that we're not, I guess, whitewashing it by making everything just so.
That's the beauty of, capturing a voice, where in Appalachia, we drop a lot of words in our sentences, and we have some odd word arrangements within sentences that maybe, like, if you were writing an English paper, or a dissertation, like, you wouldn't write it that way, but that's the way the characters speak. And so it's really, really important. It's kind of like you want to keep that honest vernacular when you've captured it. So you think about, black voices or people of color, their voices, like, it's very important that when editors, I think, approach their work, that they are cognizant of that and trying to keep that honesty. And yeah, I mean, nobody wants to read, a bunch of Southern characters that, don't talk like Southerners. Like, that doesn't make sense. Right. And I think there's certain things stylistically. So like an editor, when I worked with early on, said, like, you can drop that G the first time, but you don't want to drop it throughout the whole book, because we're going to hear it properly in our head once you've kind of given us the cue. But it looks like it's kind of distracting on the page if every G's gone. Like, you know what I mean? Like, in other words, you can overdo it. Right.
Yes.
With some of these things, even with like colloquialisms and things like that. If every character has that particular, that colloquial phrasing about, cats in a bag or whatever, like, it's going to get old after a while. So sometimes I think for writers that are trying to capture an authentic voice, I think we have to remember, like, sometimes less is more, and to not overdo it and fatigue the reader, if you will. Same thing with when we use elevated prose or poetic prose within a novel or short story. Too much, and it can slow the reader down, right? And it's sort of like there's a time and a place for it. So to me, where I like to use more poetic language is going to be when I want the reader to slow down with me and kind of linger in a space, right? And then the place where it doesn't belong at all is in action, because I want the reader to feel that sort of drive, that subject verb, subject verb. Let's feel the trauma of what's happening in the moment and not get slowed down by flowery language or, lots of adjectives or whatever might be the temptation there.
Yeah, I think the best example of overdoing it that I can think of is, I think it was one of Peter Benchley's novels.
Mm,
It takes place in Scotland,
mm,
and he has a main character, not the main character, but he has a side character that's got pretty frequent appearances,
mm,
and he has them speaking in a really thick Highland brogue.
mm,
And I think he did a good job of indicating that's how this character was speaking, but the dialogue was practically unreadable,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
because he was writing it in dialect.
Yeah, I think again for the reader, sort of less is more, and there's different schools of thought on it in terms of I guess a thought in the literary world now where if you're writing for a specific audience, I don't try to dial it back or do the less is more thing. So that you think about like characters that mix English and Spanish, the old editors or old style of editing would be like anytime we have a Spanish word, it's in italics, and and then often we'd have footnotes to explain it all. But if your audience is going to be Spanish speaking or be able to switch between English and Spanish, there's a lot of thought about like, no, I don't need to do that, right? And so I think for me, like I want to give you the voice and capture it, but then not overdo it to the point that it slows you down. So I think that's generally a good rule of thumb, unless again you're trying to make sure that you write in an authentic way for an audience such that, you need to have that back and forth Spanish, English. And it's, in that case, it's not for every reader, and that's okay. So I would say that's the same with the Scottish brogue there. Like if that's your audience, maybe that's okay. But if you want this to translate to a larger audience, perhaps again, to your point, you introduce it, you give us some inflection from time to time, but don't make it so hard that we are tempted to not read or skip over that person's voice.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Mm.
One of the things that I really enjoyed about Grow was watching Leo as he started to deal with having this power and
Mhm.
the effects that this power had on him. And it gets really uncomfortable because
Right.
Leo does things that, I think if he reflected on it later, he'd be terrified with the things that he's done.
Mhm.
When you're and a lot of the story revolves around power dynamics and the effect that status or ability has on a person's psyche. When you are sitting down to write a new story, how much thought do you put into the themes that you're going to uh, play with in the story that you're working on?
When I first sit down to write a new story, I would say almost none. I don't think about it at all. And so, but I know there are different kinds of writers. So we talk a lot about the plotter and the pantser, right? So I'm absolutely the pantser. And what happens for me when I sort of outline, I want to have this grand treatise on the problem of power, right? And I sit down and try to do it like I'm bored to fucking tears very quickly because I
Yes.
already know where I'm headed, and that bores me. And so the way I sort of explain it is, like a lot of writers, I have a full-time gig and job that I go out and work on every day. And so when I sit down to write in the limited amount of time that I have, then I want to have fun. It needs to be fun. And when it feels like work is when I don't want to keep going. So I have tried to plot novels. I have plotted out several novels, none of which I finished. So a long-winded way to answer your question in the sense that when I first sit down to write a story, I don't think about any of that. Often I have a scene or a character, and that's all I know. And so I just go in like a maniac, and it's clusterfuck. It's terrible for a long time. But what does happen to me as I get deeper into the story, hopefully that first scene drives me to another scene, or that I figure out there's another character I need to talk about or whatever. And so what happens is as I get deeper in the story, I'll start to become aware of those things. And so a lot of times the themes that emerge, like I would say in both books, I am dealing with the problem of power and how power corrupts. But that's something that is sharpened as I'm doing rewrites or as I get deeper into the story. And so I don't think about it when I'm drafting. It's more just like trying to get out the idea. Just take the idea, run with it as hard as I can. Hopefully more comes to me. And that does tend to work better for me. Again, when I sit down and map out a story, even a short story, I just don't feel that sense of exploring that I need. So when I started both these books, I had no idea where they were going. Right. And to me, that is where the excitement comes. Like I want to be surprised. And for me, that works because I strongly believe if I'm surprised as I'm going through the story and I have these epiphanies, that I'm like, oh my God, I've got to write this scene next because blah, blah, blah. Like if I'm excited, hopefully the reader is excited. And one thing is, for sure that one of my writing mentors told me is if you are bored writing it, the reader will absolutely be bored. Right. So anytime that I feel bored, like I'm done. I'll just go for a hike or something. Like I do not try to force myself to. Now I try to write every day, but if I have an idea that's boring me, like that idea is dead. It's gone. And I'm going on to the next thing.
Things about Leo's journey with the power that he develops and starts to use, is there are big chunks of the book where I don't like Leo, and I don't think we're supposed to. Like,
No.
at least I don't like his choices. How far do you think you can push a main character? Because Leo is the main character of the story, arguably. How far can you push that unlikability before readers start to stop caring about this guy that you are spending 300 pages talking about?
I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, I think you are doing a balancing act. And, there's sometimes, I'll read book reviews of, can't think of a classic, but, read a book review of a classic and they're like, well, I didn't really like the main character or some of the stuff they did. It's like, that's kind of the point, right? A little bit. Now your character can be so nihilistic and so terrible that like we can't connect and like feel anything for them. That's a problem. But to me, like I need my characters to make mistakes. And so what I hope I do is give enough of his humanity as you're going along. So you're like, oh my God, please don't do that. Oh shit, you did it. But then I can ring you back in with, a touch of humanity at some point. So it is a balancing act. And I think to your point, you can go too far. I mean, we've probably all read books like that where they go so far that we're just like, we don't care when things happen to this person. So, but at the same time, I think the artist's burden, the writer's burden is to tell the truth. And if your characters always make the right choices and the sun is always shining and like everything is working out, like, again, that's the Hallmark movie. Now I'm not knocking the Hallmark movie. Even the Hallmark movie, there's a darkness before the dawn, but characters that always do the thing we expect them to do, to me, are pretty boring. The worst thing for me is to pick up a book and start reading it, and I know what's going to happen. Like, I don't like that experience. I don't like that when I turn on a movie in the first 10 minutes, I'm like, okay, well, this is, she's a love interest. This is not like I can figure it all out right away. Like I'm done. Like I really don't want that. So part of what I try to do with my work is I want that ebb and flow a little bit. I want sometimes for you to be like, why the hell did he do that? I really want that reaction from the reader. But to your point, that I think it is absolutely a balancing act. You can go so far that you lose the reader. So again, beta readers, critique groups, things like that will help you hopefully find that right balance where the character's interesting, human, because humans do dumb shit, right? Like we need characters. If a character makes every decision perfectly, I kind of wonder, like, what's the point of the story at some point? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is the struggle here? They're obviously a genius and they can't make mistakes. And and they're beautiful and everything's wonderful. Like, okay, so why am I reading this? Like, I can't see my way into the story.
Yeah. I am trying an experiment with a serial that I've been posting to my Patreon. I was posting it to Amazon's serial thing that they were doing for a while that they're not doing anymore. And my whole goal with the main character was to make him an absolute piece of hot garbage.
Yeah.
And he's racist, manipulative. I was thinking of a certain political figure
Mm,
uh, when I'm writing this guy because he's an aging businessman. And I don't know why I'm being coy about it. I had Donald Trump in mind when I was writing this guy.
right.
And so my goal is to make this guy do these atrocious things in the first few chapters of the story. And then eventually he goes too far even for himself. And he has to reel himself back in and figure out, is there redemption for me? Is there, can I undo these things that I've done? Can I, and then basically he's getting like a funhouse mirror held up to himself. And
Mm. So
uh,
some self-awareness occurs, and
that's the hope. That's the
yeah,
hope. He's
yeah,
on that. He's, as I'm writing it, as I'm a little bit ahead of where I'm posting it on my Patreon, and I'm pantsing the hell out of this thing.
yeah.
And he's now reaching the point where he's okay. I signed, basically, he made a deal with the devil, and he's now decided that it's a brilliant idea to try and get one over on the person he made the deal with.
Good.
Um, and because in an effort, in large part, because he realizes that he's gone too far, and now he has to try and figure out his way out of it. And his only hope is that he's smart enough, or that he has enough good people around him to pull him out. So it's been
I
a
think
fun
that's really,
experiment.
yeah, that is a fun experiment. And I think, we do have a lot of stories where the character is, sort of loathsome. But at some point, like if you could make me connect, it's kind of like the Dexter books, right?
Yes.
We have a serial killer who's doing terrible things, but he's got a code so that it's not so bad, even though murder's wrong. Like, and so if you can pull off like the sort of raging narcissist that has an epiphany, I think that's kind of an interesting story, you know?
See, we'll
Yeah.
see. I'm probably 2/3 ish through. And so, yeah, we'll see this guy. But I will say that it was incredibly fun. It has been incredibly fun to write somebody who's just a pile of a piece of,
The villains are
you know,
fun to write. I mean, that's the thing. It's I have villains in my stories, and it's like, the challenge is not sugarcoating the evil they do while, giving them some depth. Because if you don't give them depth, if any character doesn't have depth, it's a problem. But I think a villain, a lot of times, they're just like the little man in the corners twirling his mustache, like we don't understand his motives. And so that's going to be part of the challenge, I think, with your character, is like that shift in motives is going to be really interesting.
yeah. And I think I would have been tempted years ago to give this guy a noble core. And I
We've
would
learned
have
some
like,
things,
oh, he was good all along.
right?
No, he was not good all along. And his journey from being that piece of shit to a decent human being is going to be hopefully what's going to be the interesting
That
thing.
is interesting. Yeah, that will be interesting, because that's not something we see as often. We do have villains that have redemption arcs, but not just the pure narcissist that grows some way. That's interesting.
Yeah. We're coming up on an hour and I want to respect your time. But before I let you go, you are in marketing as part of your day job. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm wondering what's the biggest challenge you've faced? Because if you tap a writer on any social media and you ask them what's the hardest thing about being a writer, other than editing, is probably going to be marketing. What's the biggest
Mm-hmm.
challenge you faced in marketing your work, in finding an audience, and how have you overcome that?
Yeah. So I think the challenge is in talking about your work regularly, sharing about your work regularly, but not that being your entire social media persona. So, and we see those, we see writers that only post about their work, never
Yes.
like or comment on anybody else's work. And so to me, like I've kind of tried to walk this line between talking about my work and being consistently posting my work or, blurbs of my work or whatever, with also talking about books I'm reading, sharing other things that are happening in my life. So I think there's something to be said for that balance. If you like, I think what you do is an example of striking that balance in the sense that not only do you talk about your work online, but then you host great series like this where you're contributing as a literary citizen to the community. So I would like to be known as that sort of good literary citizen. Post about books I read. I try to read a lot of indie writers alongside established writers. So to me, I think that's really where I've achieved some success, is sort of like in that balance, if you will. If it's all about me, like pretty soon everybody's gonna be like, oh my God, this guy will not shut the fuck up about himself. Oh my God. Like, no, I don't think that works well. But you can't at the same time be shy about talking about your work. And I'll give you an example. I had a person who read the first book and they're a follower on Instagram. And I've been posting a lot about like my book tour that I did for Where Dark Things Rise, and events and videos and promotional videos and reels and things like that. And then they DM'd me. That came out on September 16th of 2025. And they DM'd me the second week of January and said, oh, I saw that your new book is out. I'm going to order it. And I thought, have you not been seeing all the great content I'm producing and like all this? Like that was my first thought. And it's kind of like what you don't understand is like the algorithm doesn't show it to everyone. And not everybody is ever present online. I think some writers, some of us are like, I'm probably too online, and I've tried to dial that back a bit because we have to keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing is the writing. That's what matters. A good story is what matters the most. You can be great at social media, and you see this sometimes. You'll see TikTok personalities who are writers that 20,000 followers or whatever. And then the book is like, okay, right. That they've not kept, in my opinion, the main thing, the main thing. Great social media. They should like market that and sell that to other people because they're really good at it. But that's where the skill is right now. And again, not casting any shade, but we do have to keep the main thing, the main thing. But again, I tell that story to say, like, just because you've been posting about your book, every couple of weeks for months does not mean everybody has been served that content. So the thing that I hope my followers who engage with me a lot will forgive is the fact that I'm going to talk about my books a lot, right? I'm going to talk about other things, but because I know they may see it too often. That's the thing. I can't control the algorithm. The algorithm might show Scott all my stuff. It's like, my God, Andrew, I know you have a book. Holy shit. Can you stop? Whereas other people that I'm trying to reach, other readers, like they haven't seen anything. Again, I posted about that book sort of nonstop from say July of 2025, because I'm trying to get pre-orders, through January of 2026, did 16, 18 events that I posted about. And someone who follows me and is friendly towards me just saw something that told them the book was out. So I would ask for grace from, folks that, that it feels like you're getting too much of this content. But at the same time, like my message to writers is do not be shy about doing that. So figure out what works for you. I mean, you hear about these ratios, like post 3 non-book things to 1 book thing. Like, I don't know about any of that stuff. I don't know if any of it works. Nothing has seemed magical for me in terms of like, if you post it, 9 a.m. on Tuesdays, that's the best time to get the most. No, none of that seems to figure in at all to any of this from what I can tell. I feel like if you get that information, it may be accurate at the time, but then it changes. So I think the marketing message I would give is like, be yourself, have other interests other things you engage with, be an active part of the community. Don't just talk about your stuff. Like some people just come and post their stuff and never comment or don't appear at least to engage with any other person. It's like, nobody, they're going to tune you out pretty quick if that's your only thing. So to me, it's like, I want to talk about books. I want to boost other authors. I want to, share more of myself. And again, like on Threads, it's just, there's kind of a silliness that I've leaned into there. It's a little campy, and to me, it's funny. And if sometimes sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's not, but like, that's a little bit of my personality there. So I think the big thing is to be yourself, pick one or two platforms that you can really engage with, and then be more than just a constant billboard for your work, but don't be shy
Yes.
about being the billboard for your work. It sounds like I'm contradicting myself. Do both things.
Yeah. And I think that striking that balance can be tough, but ultimately I try and remember the social part of social media.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a naturally social person because of one, I'm probably on the autism spectrum. Two, I'm an ambivert. I'm an extrovert in some scenarios. I'm an introvert in other scenarios, but talking to people about my work, about their work, that's a skill that I've built over years of trial and error.
I think
And
you're
that we
right.
can't be afraid.
Oh, I think you're right. Like it's just more fun, right? If I'm gonna spend time getting on social media and talking about my books or whatever, isn't it more fun to like meet people? Like I've met some of my current beta readers. I've met them on Threads or Instagram or whatever. Like, I've grown my community, and I've found readers that wouldn't naturally find my work. I mean, I sold books in Australia and New Zealand and South Africa and like the UK and Germany, and like, I mean, I wouldn't have found those people without the online world. And so to me, it's like it's introduced me to new readers and other great writers that I've discovered. Right. So I think you hit it. You hit the nail on the head. If you're going to choose to be on a platform and post about your work, be social on that platform, sort of engage beyond just your work on that platform and get to know people. And again, to me, like, the whole writing world, we are a community, and it's smaller than it feels in a way. Right. And so being kind of a good citizen and not sort of being an asshole online and things like that, I think they matter. It's kind of like you have a great book, but then you're like a jerk, or like, don't ever engage. Like, I don't think you're going to find people, seeking out your work. Right.
Yeah.
So,
And I want to give a piece of advice in light of with some of what we said here. If you are on social media and you're promoting your work, there's going to come a temptation to send a direct message to a podcaster, another author, social media person, whatever. If you've never interacted with that person and you send them a direct message or an email out of the blue,
yeah.
do not expect to get a good. I have often told people who have done that to me, at least buy me dinner first.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And again, I think that's part of why, you try to engage and create community, so that not only can you then ask people for their advice or ask for something, like you said, DM them or whatever, but then they can reach out to you. And so what I try to do is be as good a literary citizen as I can. So the people that a lot of people that have beta read for me, like, I'm beta reading their work. People who have blurbed my work, like, I'm going to blurb their work. And it's not a reciprocity thing. Like, I'm sitting here keeping score. Well, I did all these different things from Scott, and by God, but no, it's just being like a decent person within the community. We may be able to help each other, but then maybe, I can't help you, but I can help this person because I can connect some dots over here, and vice versa. So, you don't do anything, I think, with the sense. Some people do that where it's like, it feels transactional. Like, you can tell, like, I'm scratching your back right now because I'm getting ready to ask you for something. No, I think just in general, be a good community member, help who you can. If people reach out for advice or whatever, trying to help them if you have the capacity. Again, sometimes people ask me, can you beta read or whatever? And it's like, I can't, because I've committed myself to, 3 books I'm going to be reading for different people. And I'm not going to like half-ass it for you. Like, I'm just not going to do that. Someone reached out to me and wanted me to blurb their splatterpunk book. Right. And I was like, hey, look, I'm really flattered. Like, very cool of you to think of me, but like, I do not even read those books. It's not what I write. And so I don't think I'm your target audience. And a blurb from me shouldn't signal to anyone like that's my, like, in other words, my book wouldn't signal to anyone that that's my genre. And so I kindly declined. And so again, we can't do everything. Our time is limited, our time capacity is limited, but to the extent that I can help other people, like I want to do that. I want to do that.
Yeah. And I think it's tempting to think, oh, I've done all these things for all these people and I'm not getting anything back. I think if you're genuine and you're putting yourself out there and you're being real and you're lifting other people up, then that's gonna happen organically. At least that's the best way for it to happen.
And it's been my
Because
experience, and it's kind of like it won't happen all at once, or like it won't be again. Sometimes it's not this noticeable thing, but I have absolutely been able to like reach out to people that I didn't think had any business blurbing my book, and them say yes because I'd been a decent, kind of person to them, and maybe they could see that I was, hopefully a decent member of the community. So I think it's kind of like everything, if you're like the asshole at work, nobody wants to help you at work. Right. But if you're
yeah,
like the sort of like person that's like, hey, yeah, I'll try to help, even though that's not my, if you're like the give and take kind of person, I think it pays off. Right.
for sure. I believe it does. And that's
I mean, it's been my experience.
it's part of the
Being
whole
a
reason I
jerk
do
never
this
helped me.
is
Being a jerk
no,
never helped me, or like being closed off and tell everybody to, fuck off. Like that never worked. So I think in general, like again, the point I think with the social media, so like if we're going to be there talking about our work, like shouldn't we have some fun while we're here? That's kind of my attitude.
yes,
And should I like get to know some of these writers and stuff? Cause I'm like, and that's the other thing is like, we're kind of in this together. So is it more fun to like connect with other people and talk with them or whatever, and find new books to read and all that kind of fun stuff? Like it's just a lot more fun, just a lot more fun than approaching
absolutely.
it in a transactional way. Like I've got to post 3 times because this spreadsheet tells me to post 3 times. And looking at net, I mean, it's just boring. It's boring.
Yeah. And that's like part of the reason this whole podcast exists is because I want to selfishly, I want to meet more authors and read more interesting stuff. And as we get into later this year, I'll be interviewing musicians and comedians and
Oh, that's
podcasters. So
cool. Yeah.
I'm
Love
expanding
that.
into other creative realms, and I'm discovering so many amazing people
Mhm.
who are creating these things that you don't know about, and
Great.
Susie doesn't know about. And I want people to know about these things that I'm
I
discovering
think
as
that's
I'm,
amazing. And I love to me, I think anybody that pursues something artistic, like it's always fun to learn and hear from them. Even if it's outside of something that I could do, like I can't paint, I can't even draw a straight line. But like to me, like I know a lot of art has influenced my writing. I know that I've used art in that way. And so I think all that stuff is really fast. I think it's cool that you're broadening out that way.
so in the interest of time, and I'll let you go, tell us how we can find you and yeah, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So the best way to find me is andrewkclark.com is my website. So you can see kind of what's going on with me. If I have any events coming up, any announcements, that kind of stuff. And then I'm on the social media, different platforms as the andrewkclark.com. You have to remember the K, but so you can connect with me on Instagram and Threads and Blue Sky, and tiny little presence on TikTok, and want to start doing a little more content there around some talking about books that I have enjoyed. Those are the kind of easiest ways to connect with me.
And here, dear listeners, is where I beat the drum yet again. When you are registering your domain, sure, register your book, but also register your name.
Hmm.
And if it means throwing a middle initial in there to make sure that there might be 100 other Andrew Clarks out there.
It's a very generic name, and if you leave the K out, you'll get a variety of CPA and legal firms. From what my experience is, it's a very extremely white and ordinary name. So no, the K at least gives me something else to throw in there.
I have a former hockey player, now sports writer, who shares my name,
Wow,
and
nice.
I've literally never met another Roche, much
Yeah,
less another Scott Roche. But
I love it. I love it.
hopefully he and I can share a beer together at some point.
That'd be cool.
But yeah, register your real name, use your real name or your pen name in your social media accounts, because that's how people are going to find you. I'm going to tell people, oh, I know this amazing writer, Andrew K. Clark. People are going to want to look you up online. You want them to find you,
Right.
obviously, which is
Yes.
why I've never understood social media accounts or websites that are strictly the series name or the book name.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't want to do that. Didn't want to sort of box myself in, and I want to be able to do different things. So I think you're right. There's a lot of talk about pen names. I think a lot of female writers choose pen names just because the sort of online world is a little more perilous for women.
For sure.
And so certainly understand that. But then again, take that pen name to your point and register that thing.
Yeah, because and as far as like the book thing, you're gonna hopefully, Andrew, you're gonna write 2 dozen books, 3 dozen books, and
Oops. Yeah.
I
I'm
do as
planning
a
on it.
fan. As a fan, and by the way, I consider myself a fan. Yeah, I hope that you do,
Well, I
whatever
do.
that may look like.
I have finished the third novel, and I may have an announcement about that soon. So,
We will make sure to include that in our future podcast slash social media post when you come out. And if you would do me the favor of considering like me first when you're ready to make that announcement, I will
sure.
be glad to promote
Oh,
the
yeah,
hell out of that.
for sure.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming on.
This was fun. I really appreciate you
And
having me. And I appreciate the what you do with this. And again, talking about that good literary citizen, like I don't think there's anything cooler than like getting authors together and taking them through something like this. So it was an honor to be here.
In today's unstable political climate, the marginalized communities need a louder voice than ever before. The Othering podcast focuses on the disabled and LGBTQ+ communities, providing a platform for everyone to share their stories.
But like your first thought doesn't count, because your first thought's just like your conditioned thought, and it's your second thought is your learnt better thought.
Host Mike and Dory set out on this journey to make a difference, to advocate for the marginalized and let the truths be known. The Othering podcast is available at otheringpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.